you'll introduce and so on.
Sorry?
And I'm assuming you'll introduce and kind of kick off.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
You say you're based out of Berlin as well, by the way, or are you just working through Berlin time?
No, so we are actually a remote first VC. But yeah, based at our kind of main, I'm in the office right now, main HQ is in Berlin, but from London, as you can probably hear. So spend my time actually, I've been lucky enough to kind of remote work in different places, but was in London for a month, which was nice, and now back in Berlin, so yeah.
Nice. How are things in Berlin right now?
Very hot, like super hot, which I think is a bit different to the UK right now. So yeah.
Blue sky. We had sun last week. We had our summer. We were all 5 days of it.
All of 2 weeks. Yeah, it was actually thunderstorming here, which was kind of scary. But it's what it is.
Global warming at work.
Exactly. That's why it's important for us to keep investing in that space.
Yeah. But ESG is the way forward.
Yeah, it is. It is. Absolutely.
Hi everyone who's joining. Welcome to today's session. I'll give you a couple of minutes just to jump on. And this is the bit where I double check that I've sent the right link and not the wrong one.
Oh, good.
Only happened once so far, but still.
And how many people kind of tune in per session?
It really depends. It really depends on the day, kind of time of day, what we're happening. I know we had a couple of people who actually finished their internship a week early for various reasons. So hopefully we'll have a couple of them join in. And hello if that's you. But it really, really, really depends on the day. Yeah. Give a couple more minutes because I don't think there's actually really any announcements to make today. It's the last session, so well done for making it this far. Yeah. Hopefully you've all learned lots. And yes, there's a whole load of like recordings of stuff that will go up this week. Apologies, I was on holiday on Friday and Monday, so that's why everything's even slow, a little bit slow to get up this week, but it will all get sorted by the end of the week. And then you should have access to those recordings for the first up until kind of 2 weeks into August. So if you need to make any notes or catch up on anything, you've got the next couple of weeks after we finish this session to catch up on anything, or any recordings, anything you've missed out. We will be double checking about those US recordings because they should be available, but for some reason they're not. So bear with us on that. I'm not entirely sure why it's not working, but hopefully that will all be sorted on time. So you'll have plenty of time to catch up if you're still around. And I don't know, actually the sun's just come out as you've been asking about the weather. So you can hang out in our British summer and make the most of it. I think in the interest of hopefully like getting started and finishing on the hour, I'm going to hand over to Simba, who's here to tell you about interview prep and CV prep and basically just how to get a job in VC. So I know you've had quite a few questions throughout the program about various aspects of life as an analyst and so on. Simba's 1 year into being an analyst, so she's very well placed to answer anything you want to know. I'll hand over.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro, and hey everyone. Really happy to be here. I'm like very happy that there's initiatives like this because Diversity VC was kind of a big help to me in kind of getting my foot in the door. So hopefully I can return the favor here and give you an insight into my journey into VC and kind of like, tips and tricks that I think really helped me. So just a brief introduction to I guess the fund that I work for. So La Familia, we're a Berlin-based VC. Often people hear the name and they're like, you related to the mafia, you're an Italian fund. Fortunately, unfortunately, not that exciting. But the whole kind of concept and where the name comes from is really in the way that we like to work. So we're a very relationship-driven VC, and every venture capital fund has their own style. You'll see that there are probably a lot of funds we've had masterclasses with where the partners are ex-operators and so on, and that's absolutely great. But it really depends upon the value add that the company is seeking. So for us, we kind of call ourselves the connector VC, and what that really means is that our investors are, broadly speaking, kind of in two buckets. So on the one hand, I would say like the old economy. So in Germany, they call them kind of the Mittelstand. So you can think of Bosch, Siemens, Miele, so some of the logos on the left. And it's the family offices and kind of key decision makers from those organizations And then on the other side, it's new generation entrepreneurs. So think of, Eric Warfels from SoundCloud, or Nicholas Zenstrom, who built Skype. And actually a number of our portfolio company founders have actually reinvested into the fund, which is always a great sign. And on the right, you can kind of see some of the companies that we've invested in. So yeah, as I said, early stage, we invest across Europe and the US. Got 3 unicorns in the portfolio. The fund was founded in 2016. Just got some very good dry facts about us there. So as you can see, 52 portfolio companies, 200 million assets under management. But I think let's get stuck in. That's the rest of the team. So we're small but mighty. And as you can see, very diverse backgrounds, which is also super great in terms of bringing very different perspectives and also different journeys into VC, which I think is really, really important for this conversation. So I thought a great place to start is like, who am I? What's my journey into VC? So I studied a really interdisciplinary degree at UCL called Arts and Sciences, which to this day my parents still don't understand what that even means. So essentially my major was like philosophy, social anthropology, geopolitics. Mine was neuroscience, neuropsychology, and was fortunate to spend a year abroad, or I'd say 7 months abroad in Shanghai. So just to paint the picture of I guess being a candidate that's not from a traditional VC background. But kind of the tipping point for me is at the age of 19, I got the opportunity to intern at a pre-seed fintech startup in Bali. Rather random, I know, but that kind of set the spark, as it were, for really understanding, this tech ecosystem and entrepreneurship. So from that experience, wanted to understand a company post IPO. So was fortunate to go and work at Google for the summer in Dublin. Got a lot of exposure to kind of big tech corporate organizations. Absolutely loved it. Met incredible people. I got the offer, but kind of felt like a cog in the machine. So actually decided I wanted to go back to the startup world. Was actually going to go and work for N26 in their kind of operations team. But then got a really interesting offer from Apple. So when I was at Apple, I was basically in a startup within the Apple ecosystem, investing in up and coming music artists and building tech tools to help them scale. Now, at the time, I didn't realize that this was going to provide me with 2 really interesting skills. And I think you'll speak to a lot of people in venture that have just kind of fallen into it. So this was kind of my moment where when my boss said to me, we want you to do product management, I was just like, oh, really? Like I had no interest in understanding what that was, but actually has proved super, super useful for kind of my journey into venture. So the 2 kind of key skills I got there, I think was, really seeing how a startup kind of scales. I went from like 10 people to over 100, also getting exposure to, product management, but also operations. How do you build processes? I was kind of the glue between different aspects of the organization, and then I think finally diligencing music artists, which obviously is very, very different to diligencing a company. From that realized that actually what I find really interesting is this whole investment thinking, and again then was very lucky to get an internship at Atomico, where I was working on sustainability related topics as well as B2B software. And now that brings me to where I'm at now. So La Familia, so joined the team last September. Actually joined as an intern and then converted into full-time. So also happy in the Q&A to give some insights about that transition. And the way I'd love to kind of structure the session is give the presentation and then happy to take questions at the end. So just a heads up. In terms of what I focus on, so we are a very collaborative team. So it's not exclusively these topics, but definitely a lot of the deals that I've worked on have been sustainability infrastructure, creator tooling, more at the intersection of creator tools and fintech, B2B payments, and then e-commerce and logistics. So I think where I really, really want to start is the question that I get a lot is, how do you even choose a VC? And I feel like since I've joined the industry, it's become an even more kind of lucrative job, if you will. But actually people forget that it's important for people to diligence the VC that they're applying for. And some of you may have thought of this, but just some food for thought before we dive into the nitty gritty of CVs and interviews. It's just being really, really clear on these kind of, I'd say 9 factors. So the first one that I put there is the stage, the skill set, whether you're applying for an early stage VC fund or a Series A or a Series B, as you've probably seen through the masterclasses, is very different. So just being really concrete about, you know, the skills that you want to acquire and the stage of the VC that you're applying to. Secondly, sector focus area. As you all know, you know, certain VCs have a certain speciality depending on the partners, maybe their investors. So being very clear, do I want to be in a generalist fund? So La Familia, we're a generalist fund with a strong preference for B2B kind of software, but not exclusively. So that means they also get exposure to, you know, some B2B topics. And I think that's great if you're someone that's still figuring out what kind of sector you want to like, or few sectors you want to double down in, because VC is ultimately a pretty generalist job. The third piece is, you know, geo focus area. So for me, it was really important, having worked in the States for a bit, that I still get that exposure to the US ecosystem, and also thinking strategically about, you know, which are the ecosystems that are kind of, you know, still at their infancy, but are kind of will promise to kind of show high growth, because I think that will do a lot for kind of your career progress within venture, in terms of, you know, tapping into relationships, say if it's in Central Europe or different parts of Africa, right? So just being very clear on where does the fund focus on. The fourth one is, you know, team structure. And I say this now, I work in VC and kind of wish I thought about it before. I've been very, very lucky because I joined, you know, a very, very small team, and that was very strategic of me, because, you know, I wanted to make sure that I could contribute as much as I could to the culture and the formation of a fund on kind of the larger VC landscape. So I also say this in terms of, and this kind of relates to point number 5, like really trying to find out as much as you can before you, before you apply, about the autonomy that you get within a team. The reason I say this is, like, depending on the fund, you kind of have different degrees of autonomy. So at La Familia, what I loved about it and kind of what sold me is that even as a visiting analyst or an analyst, I can still kind of take ownership of my deals end to end, right? It's not something where I'm just stuck sourcing or so sourcing, you know, looking for deals or screening, right? So, and this is something that is quite hard to assess from a website, but I've got some tips about kind of how to, you know, tap into that. And again, kind of think 4, 5, and 6 are related, but really thinking about, okay, if I want to be in venture for a while, where is the career progress? Maybe it makes sense to join a smaller fund, which I can kind of shape, and I might be able to progress quicker. Or if there's a certain sector focus that this fund is looking to tap into, and I have it, you know, maybe that offers like that's a great path for me. Then the 7th one is, you know, portfolio work exposure. Again, depending on the fund, different funds have different processes for this. So again, at La Familia as full-time, you know, I get to, you know, attend kind of board meetings with the partners. And I think that is where so much learning happens. At the end of the day, you know, when you're in venture, you're not building anything. And you know, and we're here to really help founders. So working really closely with founders was really, really important to, you know, for me. So going back, one question that, again, I've been very lucky because that's kind of just happened for me, is just asking, okay, you know, how much will I get to work with portfolio companies? I mean, actually see everything that you're diligencing actually in practice. So I think that's a really, really important one. Number 8 is culture. And again, I think people undervalue this, but I would say that VC isn't like some other industries where it's very cookie cutter. There's a set process in terms of applications. Like, broadly speaking, I think it's becoming a lot more homogenous, which is great in the sense it opens up access, but also it's not necessarily a numbers game. VC teams tend to be very, very small. That means culture is really, really important. And it's also about figuring out, and again, to point number 9, kind of who you are as a person, how you like to work, and whether you're a cultural fit. So what drew me to La Familia was exactly that. I hadn't even really heard about the fund. I was in London before, but I had a really great kind of gut feeling about both of the partners, everyone that worked there, and that for me is culture. And yeah, so I just think that I know it can be really hard to get your foot in the door in this industry, and that's why it's great that we have, you know, these initiatives, but also don't kind of compromise on you know, applying for places where you really are aligned with, you know, the people in the team, because this is such a, I would say, like a collaborative industry. So just going through, I think it's really important just to kind of have an overview of the application cycle. And obviously this will differ according to the fund, but I did some kind of, you know, calls around the industry to different VCs and how they do it. And broadly speaking, I think this is the general flow. So you'll have kind of either send in your CV or kind of broad, like a type form of questions, a 30-minute call, normally with an analyst or associate, and then a take-home case study. that I think you have for around three days to about a week, a case presentation, a partner call, and then sometimes that's it after the partner call. But often after that, there's like an all team call where you meet the rest of the team. Now, so just that's going to give an overview for that. I think the next key thing is really understanding what is the role. And I think I'm sure through all the various masterclasses, you've actually probably deep dived into each of these sections. But if we take a step back and break down venture capital or the role of an analyst or associate and so forth into the building blocks, I'd say these are the key ones. So, relationship building with founders, with operators, with other VCs, sourcing. So, finding deals, building conviction in a topic, a company, due diligence. So really going deep on a company and kind of assessing all the key aspects. At times negotiating a term sheet. So, the landscape, especially in Europe with the onset of US funds, has become more competitive. And then the final piece, which I mentioned before, is, portfolio support. So, that's kind of I'd say the key roles. And I say this because I think it's really important for everyone to take a step back and think about your skill set and how it relates to each of these sections. And you could kind of, for each one, do a kind of a pros and cons of, okay, so if we think about, I don't know, sourcing, do I have the relationships in place to source right now? Okay, if not, how can I build them? Or, what are some hats that I can start, having to kind of get my sourcing up? And that's completely okay if, out of all of these, obviously you're not going to do portfolio support right now, right? There's no portfolio to support, but understanding which of these are your kind of strengths. And it's really important, I think, in the interview process to kind of upsell those strengths. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. I think the other thing that I just add is, relationships. I think you probably heard this time and time again. But I have to say, like, my LinkedIn gets absolutely inundated with founders, people wanting to learn about VC. And I have to say, when VCs are hiring, they tend to still, which can be problematic, go through warm introductions. So what I'd say is, where you can, it's great to kind of, get a warm introduction to a fund where you can. It's not always going to be the case. And I think that VCs are very, cognizant of not limiting access to the industry just to, to certain networks. But I definitely think, like in most industries, if it comes through, a founder that and then you kind of ask for an introduction, or even a previous intern, that's what I was doing when I was applying. So yeah, just kind of don't be afraid to outreach and try and, it's not just about leveraging, right? But like building those relationships. All I would say, and just to kind of caveat all of this, is that I know it can take a while. Like, I think it took me a good, not to put anyone off, but like, 9 months to, build those relationships, actually kind of build the skill set by time I actually, got my foot in the door for whether it be Atomico or La Familia. So also, be patient with it, because it is a great industry to work in. Awesome. So I think just starting with, what are VCs, looking for? And again, these might all sound like buzzwords, but I think they are very, very, very important. So, a growth mindset, I think, is, lo and behold, and as well as kind of intellectual curiosity, which I'll come to, are really, really important. I think, a general understanding of the ecosystem, which again, I'll deep dive into. Investor thinking, which is really there to, is really what the case study is about, is really understanding how you think, as well as kind of technical abilities. And again, just, caveating, technical abilities really depends upon the stage of the fund. So, if you're an early stage fund, the technical abilities may just be, Excel market sizing, right? But if you're applying for a Series A fund, you might need, more extensive financial modeling skills. I'd say grit is a really key one, because often you will, be diligencing a deal for 2 weeks, and then at the last minute you decide we're not going to invest, and that can be really frustrating for certain people. But it's important to just, see knowledge in VC as compounding over time. So even if you're working on a company for 3 weeks, it might not be that one that you invest in, but it could be one in 6 months' time. So it's just that kind of grit, and kind of letting your ego go, because it can be easy to be like, well, I put all this work in now, come on. And there'll be one little thing that will be off, and it's like, okay, we're going to pull the plug. And then again, I keep emphasizing it, but it is, really, really important, is, culture and fitting into the culture there. Okay, so I think, again, kind of related to what I said before, looking, and I say this now, kind of reflecting upon my journey and what I wish I knew. And some of these I kind of knew, some of them weren't really mentioned to me. So intellectual curiosity, first and foremost, is key. Lots of people have probably said it. I say that even if you're going for a fintech fund or a sustainability fund, these topics are huge. So you have to be willing to kind of, at the last second, deep dive into a topic. And I'm sure many of you are kind of hungry for that, so that won't be a problem. I'd say agile working, again, depends upon the stage of the VC, but often, I have had calls, within 24 hours, we need to look at this company, and it's like, drop everything, get to it. And I think also being proactive, and I think people forget this, and I certainly forgot this at the junior level, of how important it is to kind of have this hustle mentality, right? So we're looking at a deal that we don't really know the space. I didn't really think about it, and it was only like 6 months in, I was like, shit, I should have done this earlier. But why not just trying to hit up random people on LinkedIn who are experts in the space? So being really proactive with, if there is a gap in our knowledge, without anyone even asking, let me go and try and fill that gap. So that's the sort of proactivity that I think is really, really important. We are always processing lots and lots of information and having to structure it. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is, it can be super annoying, but you're not going to know everything. And you have to really be good. And I'm still acquiring this skill of ruthlessly prioritizing and really thinking, okay, what are the key levers that are really important for us to understand and to take this deal over the line? And being able to structure that in your due diligence document. Communication, absolutely key. Why? Because you are communicating with your investors, other people in your team, founders. So something that I think, which I learned from my time at Apple, which was very helpful, is really, brushing up on my email communication, Slack communication, WhatsApp communication. Many VCs, are communicating on those sorts of channels. Staying on top of trends, investment trends, looking at also public markets. I'd say, relationship building, as I've mentioned before, and then analytical thinking and technical skills. And particularly that last piece, a lot of VC is about pattern recognition and looking to the past and kind of seeing how those trends evolve. And the reason that I'm outlining all these skills is because these are the building blocks for a successful kind of interview, and also these are the skills that you want to be pulling out in your CV. And I'll kind of get to that next. But one thing I'd say is that, so when I'm looking through a CV, I want to see examples of kind of curiosity. I want to see examples of them, relationship building, and most importantly, kind of the outcome of that. So what I'd say is also your CV, and people forget this, is a reflection of your communication. How you communicate in that 20-word bullet point, shows me how concise you can be and how to the point and analytical you can be. So just moving on to CV tips. This may sound very, very basic, but you kind of be surprised. So time is scarce in the life of VC, so I really do recommend to keep it to 1 page. And I know if you must, max 2, but I really would urge 1 page. And it sounds a bit particular, but the formatting is also really, really important, right? So keep it short sentences. I recommend 3 bullet points per section. And for my CV, for example, I make sure that every bullet point, like, there should be not one redundant sentence in your CV, right? Every bullet point should really tell me something about your experience. And often this is a mistake that I made many times in the past, but my CV was far too descriptive. And as a VC, as I said, every bullet point should relate to a key skill that I'm looking to, is needed in the job, right? So you may have to go over your CV 100 times, but just really looking at it through the lens of a VC, and maybe even having the skills that you'll get this deck after on one side and your CV on the other, and constantly cross-referencing. I think that's what I did for mine, and that's a great skill set. Action verbs for each sentence, again, sounds really particular, but often I'm reading it and it's you kind of get a bit bored halfway through the sentence. So just be very clear on, delivered this. And it's no surprise, but us as humans, our eyes tend to kind of veer more towards numbers. So where you can, quantify as much as possible. And also where you've worked in teams, it's really important to show that you've worked in teams and show that you can collaborate. but also I want to see what you did in particular. And a mistake that I see is that people either doing one or the other. So we did this, or people doing too much of it, of like I. So just striking that balance, because VC is a very kind of independent job, but also very collaborative. So it's like about seeing that balance in the two. I think a question that I often get is, okay, what if I don't have startup experience, Ember, or what if I don't have that in the ecosystem? That's where I could look at your extracurriculars, and that's where, I'm looking at, I attended this kind of AI panel, or I don't know, any startup event, because that's kind of showing me that you have an interest in the industry. And then what I really care about is like, okay, they seem to have the skills that are transferable to venture capital, and they've got the interest kind of tick. So that's the way that, I think VCs are kind of thinking about it when they're going through the CV. And I think that the three kind of key buckets there, when you're thinking about skills, I'm thinking about, do they have kind of operational insights? Why? Because then they really can understand the companies that we're diligencing. Do they have an understanding of trends? Or do they have kind of startup experience, which I kind of give you, a combination of the both. And as you can see on the other side of the page, as I said, in your extracurriculars, mention talks, seminars that you've been to. Even if there's, say you're a consultant and there was like one specific project that was kind of to do within tech, really pull out that example. I think the issue that I see is that so many people don't tailor their CV. And the issue with that is they might have all the financial experience, which is great, but that almost becomes a commodity because they haven't shown their interest in technology and the broader landscape. So yeah, I'm not sure what the policy is with putting future VC on your, there probably is, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's another example. The other thing that, actually we'll get to that in the next one. So I've kind of broken down the interview tips into three, main buckets. And saying this now, speaking to the rest of my team who are actually interviewing people for roles in our fund. So these are kind of fresh off the press. So the first thing I'd say is that when you're going into a call with a VC, like a lot of VC is about storytelling and building rapport with people. And you shouldn't treat your interview any differently, right? So really be clear. When I'm interviewing someone, I'll have the CV on the side. It's about actually telling the story of your CV and actually preparing your journey into VC. So I think the most well answered question often is, why VC? And I think people do that super well. But it's just, being very, very clear on, what brought you to here and why that's important. I think the key thing, again, which is related to your CV, but you should have, I'd say, 2 to 3 examples of your value add and being very, very clear on that. So whether that's a specific skill that you have, so or a particular sector focus area, but going into that call knowing what you bring. And also, I guess related to that, knowing your interest areas also within the fund. So you may have observed kind of, a gap in the fund, say they're a generalist fund, but they don't have anyone, covering a particular area, like going in knowing that, actually, I could add value to that. So I think these points are always, kind of interrelated. I think the other thing is, you've been on Future VC, which is awesome, trying to kind of drop, but in a very casual way, as many kind of VC concepts and tools, so whether that's valuation or cap table, I'm not saying go in, every second word being jargon. I don't think that will, really help, but it's just showing that you have an understanding of the terminology that we, that VCs use. And then, also, I think having, and again, I don't think you need to name drop in your conversation, but actually having a think before about your network and any founders or communities or companies that personally that could help could be an added value to that venture capital fund, right? So say you're joining a fund who only operates, they're based in Berlin, right, and they don't have any exposure to the Nordics, and you happen to have know some communities or founders there. So really trying to kind of, in a very natural way, lean into that during the conversation. I'd say that humility is really, really key. And then unfortunately, I've just had experiences with far too many people that I think maybe it's insecurity or so on, trying to go in far too strong. And at the end of the day, it's a conversation. It's a very kind industry, I'd say. People are very kind of outgoing and just like to just have a chat. And I would treat it like that, obviously with some structure. And I'd say, first and foremost, just don't bullshit. If you don't know something, that's okay. I would say use kind of, verbal techniques to segue the conversation to a topic that you do know, or say, you know what, that's really interesting. I want to have a read about that. I guess it might be analogous to this industry, right? So again, if you don't know something, don't bullshit. Like maybe have a stab at it in a way with all the kind of things that you do know. But it can be just quite off-putting when someone's clearly kind of bullshitting about an industry in their entirety. So I think the other thing is, actually going into the interview, really knowing the fund. And again, you'd be surprised, but for every interview that I did, I knew the average ticket size, their focus area, who the team were, like how big the team were, and their geo focus area. And I also knew the portfolio. I think people forget about this one. I'm not expecting everyone to know all 52 companies, but having a sense of, okay, where are La Familia investing, or where are so-and-so investing? And actually, having an opinion on a couple of them. So for every interview I did, I made sure that even if the question didn't kind of come up or not, I had like my top 2 favorite companies and then top 2 not so favorite companies. And it's, you're not going to offend a VC if you say that's not my favorite company. I think what that kind of shows us is that you have an opinion, and a well thought out opinion, right? It's not just about being opinionated for the sake of it. It's, having a rationale behind it. I think also understanding a particular fund's investment strategy and thesis is really important. And that will become more important, particularly in the case study. So yeah, that's a key one. Do they have an anti-portfolio? You'll find that certain funds, mostly in the US, will kind of have a portfolio of companies that they've completely missed. And that's a good one to check out, right? Because I think that gives it a great talking point also in your interview. And similarly to that, finding investment memos from the fund. So often you'll find that funds will do like a press release of why they invested in XYZ company. I really recommend going through that, and also just kind of stalking the news articles, the Sifted articles, the TechCrunch articles, which I'm sure it's kind of sounds very intuitive. But when you're going through them, it's not just to know that knowledge, it's understanding, trying to pick out how they think about it. Like, what are the trends that they kind of were honed in on to kind of make that investment decision? And the question that, I'm always asking myself when I was interviewing is, so why did this VC fund do that deal? Or kind of when I'm looking at a company, why would a VC pass on this deal? So again, this is kind of putting the lens of a VC on. And the other thing is, the reason why it's really important to know the portfolio is a question that often comes up is, can you tell me about a company that you really like, or that you think we should invest in? And the issue is that a lot of people will pitch either competitive kind of companies to ones in the portfolio because they haven't looked. They will pitch something that is out of the focus area, and hence that's why understand the ticket size, it might be too late, and so on. And I think the best feeling for when I was talking to the associates at the fund is when someone is suggesting companies that we've seen and we've considered. And I think if you can, get an insight into, it's basically just really understanding the VC fund and what they're looking for, because that is already showing, they're thinking the way that we're thinking. That's great. So I think that kind of comes down to sourcing and so on. And kind of, if you can, looking at the company list from accelerators and so on. And then the third piece is, the broader ecosystem, which I touched upon, understanding the key trends and successful companies in a space. It's also really important to, not only just understand startups, but looking further down the line. So what are the Series C companies in this, or companies that went to IPO? And then again, I always had it in my back pocket, 2 to 3 companies for a fund that I would recommend to that, fund. And I think another thing that kind of looking back that really would have helped me and kind of is just actually researching, what is a startup, even made up of, so what does a dev team do? What does a product manager do? And I think that, I've kind of learned that along the way / at my time at Apple, but I'd really recommend that because we're in this ecosystem of startups. So understanding how they work more broadly is really important. Again, related to pattern recognition, I really recommend, studying successful companies. So this is something that I do now for my job to, enhance my own knowledge is, right, so we've got Stripe. Let me try and understand how did they grow? What partnerships did they have in place? What was their business model? How did they launch in a new market? And really treating these very successful companies as case studies. And then from that, abstracting away, what you kind of learn to seed stage companies or kind of earlier stage companies. And then the final piece of it is, think about it in terms of enablement and infrastructure. And what I mean by that is really understanding, okay, so, we have this company that was super successful, say Uber, right? What were the kind of, if we kind of go a layer deeper, what was the technology? What were the kind of market patterns that had to happen to enable that? Because often that is a sign for the kind of next wave, of innovation, right? So, we started with, Uber and so on, and now we've evolved all the way into kind of, using similar apps for, last mile delivery or for, on-demand food shopping like a Gorillas or a Flink and so on. So yeah, I think that is a really, really key one that, again, I'm just sharing that I've realized now that I'm in the job, and understanding, the market challenges, the factors that will lead to a particular company becoming successful. So in terms of the case study, I think this is how I was speaking to other kind of VCs that, think about structuring it. So I think broadly speaking, so starting from the, left side, the structure, and this is very much taken from how VCs diligence a company, that, starting with, the broader, product vision, analyzing the team, business model, and so on and so on. So just to clarify, so what, the case study will often be is, we're going to send you this company, you've got, I don't know, a 15-page deck. Sometimes it will have, metrics and traction, sometimes it won't. And the kind of aim of the case studies, as I said, is how do you think? When you present it, can you express, these opinions, make sense of all this unstructured kind of information? And I think the question is, people say, why is this important? Not only is it showing you what the job really is, but also within VC is that there's a lot of noise out there, and that's it's a great industry for how fast moving it is. But I think the case study is so important as well for also giving you an insight into kind of how you have to work independently, often to drive conviction within your own team. So partners are very, very busy people, right? So often I have to kind of do all of this in my head, within an hour or within half an hour to know, okay, I should call the partner because this is closing soon and I want to bring this to her attention, right? So and this is basically the kind of bare bones, and that's why, doing the case study, and this is what I was doing prior to my interviews, kind of for fun, a bit geeky, and I think that kind of really helped me with getting up and going. So again, the key question I've kind of put in bold. Please, with sources, if you're referencing something, don't forget to kind of add an appendix or a source at the bottom. VC, as I said, is about having an opinion. And if you've been asked to give a recommendation, you must give a recommendation. I don't think there's any VC that, after doing all the due diligence is like, maybe we'll invest. It's either yes or no. And we've seen examples where people are like, I needed more information. I hate to break it to you, sometimes the data points that you have are super limited and you need to make a decision quickly. So what we really want to see is, what your recommendation would be, even with limited data points. And that's really, really, important. It is about making calculated bets. And I think a great book for that is, Thinking in Bets, which I would recommend to everyone, by an ex kind of poker player. But what that is about is making decisions with uncertainty, and with limited data points. So if they've asked you to make a recommendation, and you could be wrong, right? They could send you a company that they didn't invest in, but you still think they should. That's okay. It's just trying to understand how you think and kind of really getting stuck in. And pulling out, so kind of related to the structure, I think a key part of that is competition. Now, often when I see like a competitive analysis, and I definitely did this, I think everyone knows, it's great. So if we're looking at, I don't know, again, an on-demand grocery delivery platform. So what I'm imagining is, for the comp analysis, an Excel spreadsheet with, all the companies in each column. And then you kind of have the standard company founding date, the location, and you get all of this information from Crunchbase. Now, the thing is, this isn't supposed to be, the comp analysis is not an index of every company out there. I really recommend picking the 5 companies that you think are kind of you know, direct, or like maybe 3 direct competitors and 2 non-direct competitors. And it's really about pulling out the right information. So putting when the company is founded is really important to understand how quickly a company scales. The geo and the location is really important to understand where the competition is, because it might not be much of a concern if the competition is in Asia, if you know you're a European VC. How much money those competition have raised, especially for kind of scaling up, is also really, really important to see where they are in their journey. Because if there's a company that's Series C doing exactly the same thing in the same location, maybe it doesn't make sense to invest in a seed stage company that's doing, you know, exactly that, unless there's something, you know, very unique about the insight the company has. And then VC funds invested, I think this particularly is, you know, apparent with like US markets. So if there is a company doing something in the US that, I don't know, Bessemer or A16Z have invested in, that's great signaling, especially if that particular product hasn't come to Europe yet. So that's why when I'm doing a comp analysis, I always kind of put notable funds invested. And again, as I said, with the question that I put there below, is really pick out what are the most important you know, competitive points. So there's no point kind of having a comp analysis where you list out every feature, right? Because they're not really competing on a just a feature set, right? There's lots of, so it's about really picking out what are the key levers that I need to kind of look at this company that will help this company really reach that scale, and that is what you focus on in your competitive analysis. And the final piece is investment hypothesis, and you don't necessarily need to kind of include, I mean, I think it's really important to, but I don't think I did it for my case studies, but looking back I would, is having, even if it's full bullet points, an investment hypothesis where you give your recommendation and your opinion, right? And how do you build an investment hypothesis? There's some, you know, really good Medium articles on this, but a great place to start is, as I said, looking at similar companies, maybe in Asia, maybe in the US, understanding, you know, how did they grow? And then analogous markets. So has there been innovation in the past that maybe could be replicated in another market? So an example of that would be, really interesting with music, right? So we went from vinyls to CDs, then music was digitized. And what's quite interesting is that we went from, you know, selling whole albums to selling individual songs on iTunes. So it's kind of this concept of bundling and unbundling, and rebundling markets. So just seeing if there's similar patterns that you can abstract from one market and apply elsewhere. And then consumer trends as well, you know, how has COVID affected, you know, how people eat, work, sleep, you know, or, you know, the behavioral mindset of, you know, the Gen Z generation and so on. So, and then the final piece is, you know, portfolio alignment. Again, you know, is there a competitive company in the portfolio already? Does it align with the mission and the vision of the fund as well? Right. So certain funds don't like to, you know, do kind of copycat companies. So, you know, that could be a reason why the shoe may fall off for investing in such companies. So again, it's I think Tom from Atomico said this to me when I was there, but he said it's not only about, you know, it's not only about a good company. It's not only about, you know, a good investment, it's about, is this a good investment for this fund at this time? And that's how you need to think about, you know, your case study through those kind of different angles. Awesome. And I think that is the end of my presentation. Yeah, I think we've got some time for questions.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to start reading down. As usual, questions are open, Q&A is open. If there's anything that you see that you already want to ask, please upvote it. Much more likely to see it. But let's start with Winfried is asking, what would you say is a good strategy to contact funds for possible open positions? Did you go through recruitment agencies, platforms? Did you just get in touch directly? What would you do?
Yeah, so yeah, no, good question. So I got in touch directly through LinkedIn, guessing people's emails. I don't know if recruitment agencies work super well, to be honest. I think they add probably another barrier in VC. So what I would actually do, my strategy transparently, was I would message old interns. And why I did that was I could understand the culture from their perspective, like kind of in an unbiased way now that they'd left. but they also still had the contacts at the fund. So if I thought it was a fit, I would ask, is there any chance, you could get me an introduction? Or I would go through, people that worked at portfolio companies. So that's what I mean, like kind of try and have this hustle mentality of how can I get in? And as I said, like sometimes it takes a while to build the relationship. I think that I would still approach funds even when they're not necessarily hiring. I'm not saying go and message every single fund, but if there's a particular fund that you feel particularly aligned with, I think it makes complete sense to build that relationship as early as you can, depending on whether obviously you're going for a visiting analyst or associate position. So yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Basically, never underestimate the value of a good kind of online stalk and socials and who you can find, what you can do. And then kind of linked to that, David's asking, actually, I don't know about this, David, because I've been looking for this myself. An external resource with names of VCs in the UK. Did you use that, or did you just kind of hit LinkedIn? We've got internal stuff. I don't know if there's anything we can share.
Yeah, the thing is that there's so many VCs. So
yeah,
I like, and I remember, when I like 2 years ago, maybe finding a list, but to be honest, it didn't help because it was just a list and it was just lots of names and emails. So I would actually say where I would start, but this is just me, is look at companies that you really like, see who backed them, and work, like that's one route in. Or like a lot of VCs will put out content, see which content you resonate with. And also that's great, right? Because if you hit up someone being like, I saw that Medium article, I like what you said there, I know that I would definitely take that call because it shows me that they're engaged with it. In terms of, VCs in the, like, if they're an Excel list, I'm sure there is. I personally don't have one. But I think that might be a better way to go and actually help you later down the line. If it's, my point is that, I get the question of, is it a numbers game? Like to a degree, yeah, you could call it that. But also, as you can kind of see, that the application cycle is a bit long and it has to be personalized to the kind of portfolio. And obviously you can kind of recycle certain companies for a certain VC, right? But not always. So it is quite time consuming. So I'm just not sure how effective, it would be if there was a hit list, from my experience.
That's a very good point. I guess linked to kind of your point about finding funds through startups, what was for you some of the most creative or non-traditional ways that you've sourced startups? And this is from Topher.
Yeah, this is like super boring because like I think when you're in VC, a lot of it comes from your network. But honestly, I would be up until 2 a.m. stalking like people on LinkedIn, like stealth mode startup, just like looking at what they do. So I think this is the age-old question that even VCs will ask each other, right? What, like, again, looking at universities, looking at accelerators, that sort of thing. Thinking it also just like if you're a younger person maybe that wants to get into VC, think about the leverage that you can have that VCs won't, because we're in an office or we're at work. So those like student communities are really, really important, alumni communities. There's a lot coming out of, I think there was a Sifted article today about the most kind of unicorn universities in Europe. That's a great starting point of like, okay, they have an entrepreneurship hub. Can I connect to someone there, right? So yeah.
David, Diane's just answered your question about finding a list of VCs. Have a look on Crunchbase Pro or a few others. But yeah, as mentioned, they're changing all the time, so also keep an eye out for new ones. Kwame is saying, besides building networks, what else can I do to position myself as a future VC analyst?
Well, I think it kind of touches upon like what I was saying. I think there's like quite a lot to do in terms of reading about companies like the tech ecosystem and trends. I think it kind of relates to my presentation of when if I break down all the different skills, I think anyone can get started on them now, right? So if you're not super great at Excel or market sizing, get started with practicing that. If you're not staying on top of where the trends are, start reading, whether it's PitchBook or kind of honing on those particular areas. Yeah, I think that's kind of like a lot of what I think I covered in the actual presentation. And then it's honestly a lot of like reading and also talking to people. So yeah, aside from the network stuff, honestly, I think it's like reading around certain topics, trying to kind of find companies, speak to founders, and then also build that skill set. And that could be, you know, whether you work in, I don't know, a call center or a restaurant, you know, communication, all these things you need for every job. And you can kind of get started no matter, even if you're at uni and so on. But yeah, and also, as I said, like what I did for ages was literally diligence companies. Like I would look at a Series C company, I do write like basic bones of any DD is market, timing, you know, competition. And you can do that for any company, right? You could do that for a Trade Republic on a Saturday afternoon and just spend 2 hours doing it. And that is honing your skill of like thinking like a VC.
Yeah, thanks. We've got a question about the case study as well, kind of off skills, but we'll probably come back to that in a second, I'm sure. Under the anonymous question, under structure and case study, how does scalability differ from traction? If you could just clarify what you meant.
So absolutely. So what I mean, so traction is like the achievements to date. So like it would be recurring revenue that they've achieved, how many customers do they have? So that really depends upon where the product is. Scalability is about how it's growing, right? So scalability is, are there any network effects that they can tap into to, you know, grow it across different regions? Right, and then, you know, traction is like what they've achieved to date. Basically, it's kind of like thinking about, you know, and that will show you an interesting kind of growth trajectory, right? So they often will give you a graph, and if you can see that it's been growing month over month, I don't know, like 50%, that's obviously, you know, you're on, it's a really, really good sign. You know, right, month over month for say the past, I don't know, 6 months, right? Like obviously it depends on the time frame. But yeah, that's what I mean by that. So I'd say, yeah, traction is what has been done to date. Scalability is like, how is it going to, you know, grow further, you know, in the future, basically.
What they've done and what they could do. And also, I guess, linked to the case study, you mentioned most of the time there is a kind of word limit to this case study, but if there isn't, what would you recommend being the absolute maximum amount of space that you give?
You mean on the case, the case study?
If when you're writing up a case study.
Yeah, that's a good question. Ooh. Yeah. Oh, I haven't really thought about that actually.
Assuming you haven't made your font like size 6 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, make it readable. I think detail is always great, but don't go overboard, because also, again, the biggest thing in VC is that that you don't have all the time in the world. So whilst it's great that you may be super detailed, I would time box it for sure. But I think the main thing is that, like, you know, that list that I gave in terms of structure, you may not need to cover it all because it may not be relevant for the deal. So for example, I talked about traction. They may be a pre-seed company, they may be a seed company with no customers. So you don't really need to focus on that. So it really depends. I think it's really looking at the deal in the context, and, you know, analyzing it according to that context. And I think if you cover those main pillars, you're good to go. In terms of like an actual number, in terms of page limit or word limit, I don't really have one. But yeah, that would be my answer, I think.
Yeah. Good. Keep it concise, but cover everything. That's good. Question from Fiona. Do you perceive any limitations in working in or for a new VC firm with fewer than 5 employees?
Yeah, I think good question. I think it depends on the type of person you are, right? Like that's like working in a startup. You could hate it because it's super unstructured. You could love it because you have the chance to contribute and build it, you know? I think it's quite individual. Like I wanted to work for a small VC because I wanted to help shape it to, you know, hopefully becoming a tier 1, you know, the like tier 1 VC within Europe. But obviously there are, you know, pros and cons. I think maybe a con in there could be that because there's always, you know, a lot to do, you may not have the hand holding and the guidance and the mentorship that you need to kind of get up and running. Whereas at a bigger fund, obviously they've hired loads, they know how to kind of onboard people. On the flip side of that, you may get more autonomy at a smaller fund, right? And more exposure. So I think it's like more your kind of risk appetite and the type of person that you are. If you're the type of person that like gets a bit overwhelmed with loads of kind of, yeah, a lot of kind of changing parts, and maybe a smaller fund may overwhelm you. At the same time, it's also, yeah, a great learning opportunity because you have direct exposure to kind of the partners and the key decision makers, which I think is invaluable. So, yeah.
Well, really kind of going back to that original point that you kept making, and rightly so, about culture and just cultural fit. There's so many different elements of culture. So yeah, I think that's really sort of clarifying. Henry's got a question about addressing themselves as VCs. Henry, I'm going to assume that was meant for me, and I will save that for a later time, but let me know if that's different. Madonna, do you have any particular advice for someone with 10 or more years of work experience in corporate, mainly in the corporate world, looking to break into VC?
Yeah, I think no, that's a good question, and I wasn't sure kind of what the audience would be here. So yeah, I've had this kind of question before. I think that it depends upon your background, what you've kind of done. Did it say consulting or sorry, it went already.
It was corporate.
Corporate. Okay. Yeah. So I think in terms of advice for that, I think the pros of that is that you have experience with working in teams, obviously, albeit it might be different to kind of the small kind of agile teams, but it's really picking out those experiences if you can. Again, come back to the skills, like what do you need in VC to really, really thrive, whether that's the communication, thinking about trends, and so on. Picking out those experiences within 10 years and kind of honing in on them. And I think that's when the network becomes also really, really important. And I'd say, yeah, as much as you can, kind of building out those relationships with founders, with other VCs. I think, I'm not sure about this person's background, but is there a particular sector focus area? Are you an expert in that? So really kind of leveraging that as well. I know it's a bit repetitive what I'm saying, but I'm just saying that as someone who's seen people kind of transition with 8 years experience, in a very particular kind of like industry, and then segueing into VC, but they were able to demonstrate the transferability of the skills that they've learned, and ultimately just hunger for the industry, because there's so much out there and so many resources, and I think if you're able to convey that, you can position yourself strongly, for sure.
I'm Kevin, so we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to try and race through these. Kevin is asking, what are the major differences between an analyst and associate? Are there any major differences, or is it just a title?
Honestly, it depends on the fund. So certain funds, like I'd say ours is far more flat. Generally though, like I would say that an associate, so what will happen is that a company will come in and you go into due diligence mode, and an associate will often set the parameters of like, okay, Simba, so it's XYZ company. I think we kind of brainstorm together. I think we should dig into this aspect, and you kind of do that together. The analyst is the one that will kind of go away and do all of that work. And I think that the analyst will spend a bit more time kind of screening deals, i.e. looking at pitch decks, which I know you guys had a session on as well. So again, really depends on the deals. I know some analysts at certain funds, which wasn't really my vibe. All they do is source and screen. That's not what I want to do, because I think it's really important to have exposure to a deal end to end. So again, that's why I mean, when I come back to the first point, diligence the VC, understand what the analysts and associates do. I'd say that broadly speaking, associates tend to have over 2 years experience already. So sometimes it's an experience thing in a particular fields, whether it's consulting, operational background at a startup, or already in VC, whereas analysts tend to either come out of uni, have had 1 year experience, 1.5 years. But in terms of how it affects the role, I think it's mainly that. I think analyst is a bit more executionary in general. In my fund, I'm lucky, I kind of, it's a very flat hierarchy. Associates will tend to, and also associates do a lot more work in terms of with portfolio companies. So we'll sit on the board, that sort of thing.
You can also ask the fund these questions as well. That's another key point, like ask them, double check. Ongun is asking, what do you think is the most value add in-demand set of skills for a junior analyst or associate if you could pick your ideal associate right now?
You're gonna get annoyed. It depends on the fund. It really depends, because they could be something that you're kind of missing. I think most in-demand skills. I don't know. For me, it's just like people that are like, have got this hustle mentality. They're proactive. We don't understand a sector. They go out and they do a reference call with experts in the space. The other thing is sector. Is there a sector that like crypto, I don't know, Web 3.0, that you're really well positioned and there's no one at the fund, at VC funds, because this is a trend that's come up in the last, I don't know, like as in major trend, come to the surface in the last, 7 months, where people are paying attention, right? So you have to think about it, like that. So for me, if I was running a fund right now, if I was hiring, and and there's someone that knows everything about Web 3.0, I think, oh, that's super cool. That's aligned with my vision of my fund. You see, so again, it depends upon, annoyingly, the fund and where it's looking to go. I think a great question I got asked by someone who was interviewing at our fund is, where do you feel like the kind of skills or the area which your fund is lacking? And I thought that was a really interesting question, because they're already thinking about, you know, what can I add? How can I slot in? How can I be complementary? So yeah.
Again, make use of questions for funds, basically. We are now 1 minute past 6:30. Yeah. You able to stay for an extra minute?
Sure, yeah, all good.
Cool. Okay, sorry, we're going to have to ask these last questions.
Yeah,
anonymous question about what questions did you ask the VC during the interview? Anonymous attendee, there's a whole side section to a podcast that I will recommend afterwards, because I've got an episode on this. Another question is, how important is it having a founder network when applying for VC roles? Could it be a deal breaker if you didn't have one?
Not at all. Like, I didn't really have a founder network at all, so don't worry about it. Like, you know, I just gave that as an example. Again, like, I think it depends upon the role you're applying for, right? If you're like an analyst, or if you're a visiting analyst, like, of course you're not going to have many founder networks, because your mates all your age. So unless they're really exceptional, they're probably not founding a company. That's okay. Well, for me, what would be more important, again, is you're showing grit and hunger for the industry. You're reading a lot about it. You know who the big founders are. You follow them on Twitter, for example. It's, you know, don't get too bogged down in, I think it can sound very overwhelming. You need to know operators, you need to know VCs, you need to know, like, don't worry. Like, we also understand you're not in the industry. I think being part of initiatives like this, just reading around the topic, showing that growth mindset, which is what I put, is really important. That's what I came from, you know, the music industry. Yes, I had a lot of product and like, you know, knowledge there, which helped me, but it wasn't, you know, I didn't know a bunch of founders. So yeah.
Okay. Winfried, I've just realized I accidentally signed off your question, so I'm going to quickly answer that as well. Winfried was asking about putting photos on your CV, which I think will be useful for quite a few people, depending on where you are.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that depends upon the country
yeah.
that you're applying for, because in the UK it's a no-no, but but in Germany I think you do it. So I'm sorry that I would just clarify what fund you're applying for, because I don't want to give wrong advice.
Yeah, I would say the same. In the UK, absolutely don't. But I've also heard the same in Germany. I think in the US it sort of depends as well. Sometimes it's a big yes, and sometimes it's absolutely no. So double check with people around you when you're doing your due diligence. Good to know. And okay, last question. This is actual last question. Sorry, thank you.
I can ask the last two as well. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I can see them both. Sure. Yeah. So, what question did you ask the VC during your interview? Do you have any tips and advice on around structuring questions for one's interview? I think for that one, I went and stalked the VC and they written an article, and I asked the question about the article. So yeah, I think, you know, that was key. You know, if they, you know, again, coming to that question of really, I think there's three things you can do. So ask a question about the content that they put out there. What was the second one? Like kind of ask about the culture. I think that shows an insight into, like, you know, really wanting to understand how they work, for example. And I think, you know, showing like what I particularly like is when someone is like, oh, you know, ask something about the fund, and then kind of says, oh, you know, it's funny, like I really like, you know, community building. Maybe this is something that, you know, you could bring to the fund or portfolio company. So like, you know, already thinking about initiatives and what they could bring, you know, like kind of, I don't know how you do this, but like off the top of my head, but, you know, twisting the question. So you're kind of dropping what you can bring, I think is like, you know, a good point. And then I think, you know, you may have prepped something, for example, you know, companies that you like that you didn't get to mention in the interview, bring it back to show that you know them, you know, the portfolio companies. Just be like, oh, really interesting, I saw you did this deal. Would love to understand like your thinking or thought process behind that, you know, given XYZ fund, you know, funded something really similar. You know, what does that show? They know the portfolio, that they know who that other fund is, you know, they're thinking about the space in the sector, they're thinking analytically, right? That's four things in one question. So it's like, you know, I'd say thinking in that way. Yeah, hope I answered that. And then the final one is, in hindsight, if the opportunity at La Familia had not showed up, would you have stayed at Apple? Do you recommend gaining experience at a company of that size? Or would you recommend gaining experience at an early stage, high growth startup? Yeah, really, really good question. I I think like there is so much to be said about operational experience, to be honest with you. For me at Apple, I loved it, but it was my time to leave. And I was like ready for it because I leave a place when I stopped learning, and I felt that it was like the processes had been built, it was getting a bit repetitive. I would really, really recommend, like transparently, I think I really would recommend either getting an internship or getting operational experience at a high growth startup. I think there's two different, trains of thought. There's pros and cons, right? So I think a big thing you have to deal with in VC when you're a young VC is like, you may not have the credibility because you're 25 sitting opposite someone who's 60 and built a huge company that exited. And you're like, who am I to tell, to diligence your company? So that's why I think humility is really, really key. The pros of it is that, you're at the heart of innovation at a very young age. You may find a company in your fund that you want to go and work for. But I think that like either way, and to be honest with you, like transparently, I actually wanted to go and work for a startup after, I was thinking about working for a startup after Apple or even Atomico. So, but then this opportunity just came along with La Familia that was just, I kind of fell into it, it all aligned, and I was like, I don't want to pass up on this great opportunity, I'm just going to go for it. But actually that was the crossroad that I was at of, do I join another startup or do I go down VC? Sometimes an opportunity just comes up and you just have to roll with it, right? So again, I think it depends upon your situation. I'd recommend applying to VCs and startups. That way you kind of keep your options open. And again, I think that how you prep for a VC interview can also really help also the startup interview. I think there's quite a lot of overlap there as well.
That's a really great point and point to end on it this session, and also to the end of this entire cohort of Future VC. So thank you so much, Simba, for being our final speaker and closing us out. And thank you everyone for joining again. Great job. We've made it, like 7.5, 8 weeks. That's a lot of learning. So thank you so much, everyone. As usual, all sessions and everything will be made available at the end of the week. You'll have, I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, but for anyone who wasn't here, you have a couple of weeks to catch up on all recordings from this week. So you've got until mid-August. So don't worry if you have any issues accessing anything, drop me a note, but you should be able to kind of follow everything up. If people want to get in touch with you, Simba, after this to ask any other questions about life, the universe, asking questions after interviews, what's the best way to do that?
I would say LinkedIn, but just bear with me because my LinkedIn just gets super swamped, and I'm just cautious to give out my email because my inbox is kind of overflowing with deals there. So I would say, LinkedIn, just be patient with me. I'm sorry if I don't get back straight away. I will try my best, but yeah, as you can imagine, it's just like a lot of founders, other VCs, people aspiring to get in. I do try and get through. But yeah, I think that would be the best method.
Yeah. As ever with LinkedIn, try and put a message to say where you came from and what your question is.
That would really, really help. Honestly, I think I put that in my bio. There's just so many people that add me and then don't explain why, and I'm kind of like, that's really great to connect, but I don't really know how I can help you. So I'm more likely to respond if you just say, hey, like, look, listen to you on Future VC, had a specific question. Like, I'm more than happy to like grab a coffee or have a phone call. But yeah, that'd be great if you could put it in the question. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, at some point, we're hoping to do some kind of wrap party event in person if we're able to, if you're in London, but the rules have been all over the place. So we haven't planned anything yet, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. But other than that, Future VC over and out. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.